How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Today we are going to share a story, a journey about a gentleman who went from officer to high-level executive staff with the exact title of Assistant Deputy Commissioner. It's a great journey. It's a good friend of mine, James Ferreira. We call him Butch. He told me not to call him Sir anymore, so I'm not going to call him Sir. I'm going to call him Butch or James. I think we can use that interchangeably until I get in trouble for calling him James. But the journey is important, guys, because along the way, as we share on his life and his travels up, we're going to give little tidbits because, again, as he traveled, I mean, think about all the different transitions in his career. You know, he went from officer to frontline supervisor, then even promoted out of a department into the administrative level where you saw the runnings of a whole facility, and then eventually the runnings of multiple facilities. So there's so much you can learn from someone who has traveled so far and then willing to go back and share their story. Now, for me, real quick, I think I'll be happy once I finally secure the administrative position or the running of a house. Right now, I'm second in charge. I just like to have one more level. I'm not looking to go any further past that because I still want to, be close to my people, but still get the highest level that I can see, where I can see the operations as a whole. But I think having this dialogue and kind of seeing, what it's like to run multiple facilities, and those from the outside looking in, the promotions, if you compare it to, let's say, like a Walmart, imagine going from like a store clerk all the way to a district manager, so you go from working the floor to being a store manager and then eventually running multiple stores. That's kind of a little parallel to, making it to that high level executive staff position, if you will. All right, guys. So I got three sponsors. Want to announce them real quick. First, we have American Military University. If you guys are looking to get a degree, seek higher education, please check out American Military University. Again, they're very supportive of what we do on Tier Talk, very supportive of what we do in corrections. We also have Guardian RFID, from inmate tracking and cell checks to cloud-based business and artificial intelligence. Guardian RFID digitally transforms jails, prisons, and juvenile detention facilities of every shape and size. Visit guardianrfid.com for more information. And guys, please check out their YouTube channel. We do promote content on there as well. And we also have Thin Gray Line Media. Guys, if you're looking to get a book published, David Schillen right now is working on a book for me. Check out www.thingraylinemedia.com. If they're interested, they will help you get your book out to the market. The prices are very reasonable. And guys, when you see their finished product, you'll know it's worth whatever money it is that they're going to charge. But again, they're very reasonable in their pricing, and the people that are doing the editing and the formatting, they work or have worked in corrections. Guys, they do have one book available on the market. Check it out. The link is in the description. It's called Inmate Manipulation Decoded. And very close, we're down to the final lines of editing. Lessons learned while working in a prison, my journey from officer to administration. Are you ready to take your correctional career to the next level? In about 2 or 3 weeks, hopefully, I'll announce the date, so get ready. It'll be on Amazon soon, and it'll be available for purchase. I believe it's going to be around $45. It is a hardcover book. It's like a journal. It's got about 509 pages in there, so there's a lot of information. But the key is to share your journey and then pass it off to someone else so your legacy lives on and they have a great start to their career. James, what's up, brother? What's up, Butch?
Anthony, what's going on?
What's going on? Hey, Butch, real quick, do you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
James Ferreira, former Assistant Deputy Commissioner for the Northern Sector, the Massachusetts Department of Corrections. My employment lasted in the Department of Correction for 35 years, 9 months before I retired. I started as a correction officer and made my way through the rank structure and ended up as an Assistant Deputy Commissioner.
Well, let's share your story. So again, I titled it From Officer to Executive Staff. I think there's going to be a lot of nuggets here that we're going to offer. We're going to kind of navigate through your 35 years and 9 months of a very, very successful career. And by the way, guys, Joe is new to the channel. James is new to the channel. He's been on the channel for a few episodes now. So I like to always go back and try to give people a chance to kind of share their story, to give people a better understanding of the people that I have on my show. So the first question I would like to start kind of goes back to before you entered corrections. First off, was corrections even on your radar as a career?
So, I think I'd be wrong if I said no. I will tell you though that I did not have any relatives in corrections. I really didn't know anyone in corrections. Um, I was in the military. I was in the Marine Corps, and I was getting close to my EAS, end of service. And I had to start thinking about what I was going to do afterwards. I grew up in a two-parent household. My dad was Portuguese and very strict, and my mom was his partner in crime, and she was also very strict. And I was a typical 22-year-old young man leaving the Marine Corps, now coming home when I decided that I was going to get out of the Marine Corps, and I had to have a plan. My dad wasn't going to put up with me coming home and not working and that type of stuff, or working some dead end job. So actually, my dad was the superintendent of Catholic cemeteries in the city that we lived in. So I got out on a Thursday. I drove home. It took me about 16 to 20 hours to drive home from where I was coming from, and I took Saturday and Sunday off, and I had to start work with my dad on Monday. I will tell you though, at that point, we brought on some part timers during the summer to cut grass and stuff like that. And one of the gentlemen was a correction officer. He was a sergeant at a place where I ended up working. In the long run, he ended up working for me. But I asked him about it, and I saw, I knew how much he made and what his shift was and that type of stuff. So that's when, I really got interested. But I will tell you, I did take the police exam, the Massachusetts State Police exam. I think I took that while I was in the service a year before I got out, but I only got a 96. And back then, you needed to score 100 to be considered. And I didn't take any police exams after that. And I think I mentioned earlier in an earlier podcast that when I got hired for the department, we didn't have to be certified yet through the civil service process. We could get hired off the street and then take the test at the next available moment. It was a hiring, I guess I could say a hiring crisis. So they were taking people right off the street. So that's what I did. I applied at two prisons. One was Norfolk State Prison in Norfolk, Massachusetts. It's a medium security prison. And the other was Southeastern Correctional Center on the Bridgewater Correctional Complex. At the time, they had 5 different prisons there, and they had just built 2 of them. So there was a big expansion, and they needed some correction officers. So I worked for my dad for about 2 years. I was 24, and I got the call to go to an interview. I got fingerprinted, went to an entrance interview, and they hired me. Like I said, I didn't know the first thing about corrections, only what I had talked to that gentleman at the cemetery. And, I told myself I knew how to work. My dad taught me how to work, no matter if it was, working in the yard, in the garden, working on cars, whatever it was. My dad taught me how to be a hard worker. And I knew that, especially after being in the Marine Corps, that I was going to be able to do it. I thought that, if I met the challenges earlier in my life, I thought this one would be rather, I guess I want to say easy, but easier. I went into, they did the background. They went and saw my dad, and I remember the gentleman, the correction officer that was doing the background checks. He ended up working for me as well at one time. Mike Curran, really nice guy. And I got a start date. And what happened? That's my son calling me. I went to the academy, and what happened in the academy? We had I believe about 50 folks. Some that had already been working back then. They put you right to work off the street as well, and then you'd go to the academy a little bit early, a little bit later. But our class started in the academy, and we didn't have to live there. We did commute, but it was rather vigorous. I remember the first couple days, the instructors were very, very serious. And I went in the summer or April 29th was my first day. And it was an unusual hot April or May.
What
And
year was that, Butch?
that was
April.
in
What?
1986, April 29th, 1986.
So, and how old were you? 22
I was
or 23?
24. I was
24.
24 when I started in the department.
Hey,
And
Butch, I wanted to ask one thing. So, just to go back a little bit. So, I know some facilities have centralized hiring, but back in the day, you were hired at the facility. Is that how it worked? It wasn't like a centralized recruitment?
that's a very good question. Back then, the facilities were still doing some hiring. Now, did they take us, all of us on that Bridgewater complex and throw us into that one training class? Yes, but after graduation, we kind of all went in our different ways. And I think it's important to understand in the Bridgewater Correctional Complex, there were 5 different facilities at the time. One was Southeastern Correctional Center, which is where I started. That was a low medium security prison. It's one of the oldest physical plant prisons in the country. In fact, it's closed now. Had no running water or toilets and sinks in the rooms. And that's where I worked. And then most of the other folks went to a place rather famous in the correctional world, the Bridgewater State Hospital. One of the new facilities was the Bridgewater Treatment Center for the sexually dangerous. And then right after that, they built Old Colony, which was a high medium. And that was the last facility. We also had a boot camp back when that was popular in corrections.
How long was your academy back then in '86?
I believe it was 10 weeks, and I think they reduced it to 8 weeks in the last few years based on the hiring crisis. But
it's unique because I know, like, for us, depending on the states, we've upped the amount of weeks. So for you in 1986 to have done 10 weeks, that's pretty damn good back in 1986. I know a lot of places at that time, they didn't even go to academy. They were hired and put right into the facility.
Yeah. Like I said, there were some folks that were already working, and then all of a sudden they were in our academy class, but they weren't working for long. I think it was a couple weeks, and then they needed to go to the academy. And from that point on, no one came in off the street. For the rest of my 9 months, everybody went through the academy on new employees.
So you went, let me ask you a question. So you went into the prison, worked a little bit, and then was sent to the academy?
Not me. I started
the
academy, but there were people in my academy class that went and worked at the prison first. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, when the class was filled and started up, they received orders to report to basic training.
Now, obviously, I'm a big proponent of going to the academy first.
Mm-hmm.
It gives you the foundation so you can learn how to apply things. I know a lot of places don't want to invest the money until they know that the person has some level of commitment. But my problem is once they're behind the wall, we become reliant on them. And some of these people that don't go through the training, they're not certified. They can't do certain things. So I'm a big fan of let's give them the foundation. Let's roll the dice. Let's bet on them. And then because at the end, when they're behind the wall, I want someone that's fully certified that can do the job. I mean,
I'm not even sure how, someone could go and start working behind the wall without going to the basic security training. I'm not sure what type of role they played back then, or how they were assigned, or could they be assigned by themselves, or what kind of impact they actually had on a shift or a facility or even a unit. I'm not sure because, like I said, I never experienced it ever again after that.
Right. And so what was it like when you told your family this was a career you wanted to get into? What was their thoughts about the profession in general? What were your thoughts about the profession, being that there was very limited areas to research?
That's an interesting question. I remember not doing very well in college, my first semester, and I went to a facility, a college named Salem State in upstate Massachusetts, and I didn't do very well. And I thought to myself, this isn't going well. I can't. I'm not ready for this. So I couldn't go home and tell my dad that I was quitting college, and without a plan. So my parents were pretty used to it. I went home and told my parents I was joining the Marine Corps. Corrections at that time, they didn't know anything about it. We had no one in the family that worked there. So, I mean, I think they had confidence in me, and I had the backing from day one that I was going to be able to handle it. And if it was dangerous, I think they thought couldn't be any more dangerous than what I did the last 4 years,
Right.
Um, so yeah,
How
I never remember them having any real concern about my safety.
Just out of curiosity, too, when you were speaking to the gentleman that worked for your father, that was a correctional officer, outside of external incentive, was there any other things that he said that kind of motivated you to try out this profession?
Yeah, I thought, he had the flexibility. I remember a few times that he changed shifts. He was working the 3 to 11 shift, and before he went to work, he worked a couple days a week with us. And his days off kind of changed. He said he bid, he talked about bidding on different days. He had things coming up that he needed to have a certain day off. I noticed some flexibility. I had, you look back, I thought they were foolish questions, but I said, hey, do you have to salute the lieutenants and the cap? I was coming from a place where a lieutenant or a captain was a commissioned officer in the United States Armed Services. No, you don't have to call them sir, nothing like that. But they were supervisors, um, this guy was what you would, when you looked at him, it was something that, you saw what people think correction officers are. He was a monster. And he would come into work he worked at a very, very, very difficult place. He worked at a facility, Bridgewater State Hospital, for the mental ill. And in Massachusetts, I can tell you this: 49 other states do it differently, and that wasn't because we were on the cutting edge, but very, very violent place. He would come in with broken knuckles and get kicked, and he was injured a lot. But I remember him before he was a correction officer, because he worked for my dad way back then, and my dad used to say that guy's crazy, but he was a good officer. Like I said, he worked for me. Later on, he was an operations officer when I was a deputy superintendent at Old Colony Correctional Center, and but yeah, so he told me some stuff, but it made me it didn't make me turn the other way.
Man, what was it? So, I mean, obviously, out of the academy, you are given some level of expectation of what you're walking into. But then when you finally walk into it, it's like, okay, what did I just get myself into? Did you ever have an oh shit moment on day one? Like, what am I doing here?
I got to tell you, I've had this thought many times, a conversation with myself. I sort of explained the facility, but it really was one of the oldest. So there was a lot of history there. And if you look back on the Bridgewater complex, there's a lot of documents out there and stories and books that talk about it. Way back in the day, it was a facility for absconding young men. They did lobotomies at the Bridgewater State Hospital on the complex back in the 1950s. I think 1956 was the last one. So it had a lot of history, and it was kind of a cool building, and my mind would wander. But I will tell you that where they had no plumbing, and I'm not embarrassed to say this, but back when I started, they had like camping buckets where it had fluid, a chemical that they would put in there, where if they had to go to the bathroom at night in their cell, they would urinate or defecate in this, like, it's a camping latrine, and they would come out in the morning and clean them up. And we used to have to, as you can imagine, search those. But my point is that early on, I said, I'm not doing this for 20 years. I'm not searching, toilets and that type of stuff. I'm going to get to a certain level where I can start to make some change here. And eventually they did change. They changed the way the facility operated. They made community bathrooms and showers, and they took the locks off the door. But it was a very low, medium security facility.
So you saw this as a career right from day one. I mean, when did you start realizing as you were moving through that there's other areas that you would like to explore? I mean, obviously, it's not something you realize on day one.
So we'll get to some later in my career, maybe even halfway through my career, where I actually went on the computer and wanted to move on from corrections, and we'll get to that. But I did apply I did get hired by Pinellas County in Florida. And when I went for the interview, took the lie detector and went through the whole process and got hired. And when it came down to me making the decision, I didn't want to leave Massachusetts. But other than, and that was corrections, that wasn't the street. But I think in Pinellas County, I had an opportunity to go on the police side and out of the jail side. But no, I really never did. I thought it was going to be a career. Early on, I think the first couple of years, Anthony, I probably, looking back, but, reading your book and listening to Tear Talk and some of the other folks, I've always had a pretty good gut feeling. And I don't like to hear people say, well, it was my gut feeling, but I often had a sense that if it was what I was doing was right or what I was doing was wrong. And that's kind of guided me a little bit through my career. Because I'll tell you, at first I thought after my first 2 years, I probably started more trouble than what I was worth to some of my supervisors. But after, looking back, I started more trouble because I could say no and stick to it, but after I gained a little bit of experience and grew into the job, I used some discretion, and I thought, at about the 4-year mark, that I was a very, personally, I thought that I was a very good correction officer.
And hey, I wanted to ask something. So right off the bat, like I always tell people that corrections is not a stepping stone. When I went in, this was a career for me, and I took advantage of all the opportunities that I felt was what I wanted. Because I do believe corrections, if you intentional with making this a career, there's so many opportunities.
Oh yeah.
Whether you want to go outwards, upwards. I mean, to sit there and say, well, I'm going to go in but one day I'm going to be a police officer. It's like, yeah, but hold on, you didn't even give this profession a chance. I mean, there's just so many avenues you can go into here that it could be very fulfilling. But again, it's an intentional effort because each road is not something that's going to be given to you. It's going to be something you're going to have to go after.
I do think new people today, and I think agencies would benefit from like a career planner position that talk to folks periodically throughout their movement or their career. The service has career planners. After 4 years, whatever your commitment is, are you going to re-enlist? And if you do, what are you going to do? And that type of stuff. So I think we would benefit because you're right. One of the things that I liked about corrections is if you didn't like it, you didn't have to do it too long. You could promote, lateral move, transfer. In Massachusetts, it's an open transfer. If there's, you put your name in by seniority, if they have openings and they reach you, and there are some other restrictions about discipline and stuff like that, but pretty much you go and you take your time with you. So, you could transfer down to minimum, pre-release, medium, maximum. You could get to a facility where you'd have more seniority than if it was at the one that you stayed at. So yeah, I all of that was attractive to me as well, as time went on.
And let me ask, so just for like when you're at the corrections, before you start to make that decision to move up, what advice would you give to someone from day one that is getting ready to maybe really invest in this as a career and really look to move up? What are some of the things that, maybe you did that helped secure the path before you took that first step into a supervisory position, from that initial entrance into the career?
I really think, and I've had this discussion with some of the folks that played a role in me moving up. In Massachusetts, Anthony, we have certain positions that they call superintendent pick positions. So if 7% of the staffing, you can pull off the bid process and give them shift and days off and assign them to special duties. So right off the bat, in the first couple of years, I wanted to be one of the prison investigators. And I'll bet you I put in for a prison investigator job half a dozen times in my first 2, maybe even to 4 years.
What was it about that position that got your attention?
Well, I thought that they had insight into what was really going on in the prison, the intelligence. It's really kind of an intelligence team. They were able to freelance a lot more than the standard line correction officer. and I thought I would be a valuable asset to that, but I never, I'm not even sure I was ever considered. Looking back, and it's funny because a really very close friend of mine today, colleague, he was one of the guys that turned me down, 3 or 4 times, and I always bust his chops over that. But that was a blessing in disguise. Look where I ended up, and I would have never ended up where I did if I would have taken that investigative job.
Well, they say, what is it? Curiosity leads to interest. Interest leads to passion. Passion leads to purpose.
Yeah. So, the advice that I would give to people is the faster you can be interested in the big picture and start to get an understanding of it, is the better off you're going to be. You'll be a better officer. You'll be a better asset to your supervisors and to the facility and overall agency if you understand the big picture.
That is such spot on advice. I mean, I'm always telling people you got to understand the big picture because it really helps us bring us together on a very good collective vision of what's expected. But I like what you said, like on day one, the faster you could pick up that vision or the faster you could pick up the importance of what we're trying to accomplish as a team, not as an individual apartment, that does carry late. Because as you said, when you move up, I mean, that's all you're being exposed to is the bigger picture. So the best way to learn it is from the ground.
And again, we've said this a couple times when you and I have discussed, on the air. It doesn't happen overnight. Mm-hmm. Learning and growing takes some time, and in many cases, it takes significant amount of time. You can block off, 6 months to a year, and you learn A, B, C, and D, and then once you've reached a certain point in those areas, you move on to other things in the big picture. And I don't think I ever stopped learning. And as a result, I don't think I ever stopped teaching. I always wanted to pass on what I have learned, and because I made a lot of mistakes, and we'll get to some of the mistakes, but I learned from them. I learned, from a lot of other folks' mistakes as well, and I thought that was important as well. And I also learned from the good things. I think I mentioned that earlier, but and we'll get to that. But so yeah, I think. If you can go in, because I remember being a young correction officer and not knowing or understanding the big picture. And I said, why are we doing this or that? Not even why are we doing it that way, but why were we doing A, B, and C? And why did we only do it some of the time and not all of the time? I thought, certain things weren't being done appropriately. I thought we were insufficient in sanitation. I thought that, I can't believe I have to work in this prison. That's a filthy mess, and the inmates would just throw shit on the floor, and no one, in uncertain terms would make them pick it up. And we started to learn. We went through, a change. We had a commissioner that was there for many, many years. And then we brought in a new one. His deputy took over, but he was only there for a short time. And then we hired a man called Larry Dubois. And Larry Dubois was a Bureau of Prisons regional director. He retired and then came in.
It's all right. You got your dog. Hold on. He's got the dog barking. Security dog. He's a CO. Barking orders. I jumped a little on that. He told me to count. I heard count up.
He's only that big. But that must be my son.
I jumped a little bit. I didn't expect it. But but as you were saying, you were talking about Dubois.
Yeah, Dubois. So he came in, and again, a lot of this is, I don't want to call it luck, because you make your bed and you sleep in it, right? And so I think you make your path. But his leadership style or message was basics. So. I made sergeant after 4 years.
Wait, I want to get to that. Wait, let me.
And I'm going to tell you how it happened.
Yeah, I wanted to have a question that leads into that. So is that fall into the basic part, or?
Yeah. Yep.
All right. So then, yeah, I apologize. But I want to ask you a question about before we get into that part, then I wanted to ask you something. So I love your first advice, by the way, as you start your career. I definitely agree with what you said. Try to get the bigger picture as fast as you can. I believe that occurs when you develop relationships with the different departments and try to get an understanding of what their role is and how you can work with them in any capacity, no matter what department you're in, especially if you're custody, because you are their template. You're the blank canvas. Every department has to go through custody. So to understand that interaction at a very ground level is important, because that's the routes you're going to take with you when you have to navigate your way to the top and see things from a little bit of a distance. But also one other thing, and I'm sure you would agree before we cross into the first level supervisory position, is you got to connect yourself to the right people, because sometimes in corrections, especially at day one, we look to belong, and that could overwhelm us to the point where we just want to be accepted by people. But I think if you go in with a professional mindset, you got to find the people that have that mindset, because it's going to be hard for me to take you seriously later on in your career if you were nothing but a screw up when you were an officer. And I know people can change. I'm not saying that, but your initial impression matters. It carries a lot of weight, especially not just amongst staff, but also amongst the inmates. And, people have to have trust as you move higher and higher. Yes, I got to have trust for you as an officer, but now you're a sergeant, I got to have more trust. Now you're a lieutenant, it's greater trust. Now you're running the house, it's the ultimate trust. Now you're running the agency, it's the highest level of trust. But it all starts from how you carry yourself on day one. If I can't trust you at the smallest of levels, I don't think you're ever going to be able to get that ultimate trust that you need at the highest of levels, where when you say something, people believe that there's an exhausted effort behind everything you're trying to do that's correct or accomplished. So I just wanted to get that out there. But I wanted to, before you mention the thing about the basics, because that does cross into you entering the first line supervisory position, I wanted to know, when did you know it was time for you to move up and seize the next opportunity? What motivated you to want to become, in your case here, a sergeant, which would be the next level up?
So I'm just going to say it. In Massachusetts, you take a test, and every so often they gave the sergeant's exam. So we took the sergeant's exam, and I did very well. And I think I was number one on the list. And they were, I wasn't convinced that I was going to, and you know about this, Anthony, take the promotion, have to lose my days off in my shift, probably going to have to go the midnight shift with shitty days off during the week until I could get enough time as a sergeant to, bid back onto the shift that's more comfortable for my lifestyle. And I had made up my mind and convinced myself, I think, that, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to take sergeant. And if I do, it's not going to be at this time, because I'm not ready. I had just started to get a little bit of seniority. And I did a lot outside of corrections. I played a lot of men's majors softball, and I had a lot of friends, and that was something that I really enjoyed doing, and I didn't want to lose that. So I had convinced myself that I wasn't going to get promoted. To make a long story short, I was going to let this opportunity pass by, and then, I knew that there would be other opportunities in the future. And I had mentioned to you earlier that there were some positions that I had applied for and never was considered or never got those jobs. There were a couple more, like the operations officer, and they gave it to this other correction officer that actually went to the academy with him. And I thought to myself, man, what do they see in him that they don't see in me? And I asked some folks that at one time, and, they were honest with me. They didn't see me as the technical, sitting behind a desk, tracking data or writing policy and procedure. They looked at me more as I was on all the extraction teams. I was on the special response team early on. And I really wanted to break that. It's like an actor, right? Getting a different role. I wanted to get away from that perception of that's all I could do, or that's what I was good at. But so I had decided, that I wasn't going to take the promotion because I didn't want to make that commitment. And we talk about that all the time. So before, I told anybody about that, I got a call one day, said, hey, Nelson Julius wants to talk to you. So now Nelson Julius was the director of security at Southeastern Correctional Center at the time. And one one of my buddies was one of the sergeant investigators, a job I was trying to get, and he called me up and he goes, "Hey, the armorer got fired today." I said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." I go, "What are they going to do?" He goes, "I don't know, but you should come in and talk to the boss." So I was on 3 to 11. He was on days. I went in early at 1 o'clock, and I knocked on his door, and he said, "Come on in, Butch." Geez, how'd you know I wanted to see? I go, "I didn't. I wanted to talk to you if you have a minute." And he asked me about Sergeant. I said, I decided that I wasn't going to take it at this time. So he had Sergeant chevrons in his hand, and he threw them at me. And I said, "I know I'm going to regret this, but I'm not going to accept it at this time." He goes, "Well, how about if I let you stay on the day shift with Saturday, Sundays off, and you can be my armorer?" I said, "Give me those goddamn things." I pinned him on. And so I was fortunate. You can call it lucky. You can call it what it is. But I honestly do believe that I earned that. They needed an armorer, they needed a good one, and they knew that I would be able to do it. And that's how I made sergeant.
And now the good thing about that, by the way, I love that story, is when we did a show recently about sacrifices, and sometimes we may be afraid to take it, but then eventually once you do, things seem to work itself out. They do. I mean, scheduling, whatever it is. But it was great that, you didn't have to take the sacrifice at first, because I think that frontline supervisor offered you the chance to understand what being a supervisor is, to where later on the sacrifices were worth it. Correct. Because at the very beginning, it's like, okay, thank God you did give it to me, because if not, I wouldn't have realized the value of the sacrifices. As I would have moved up, I would have probably not have taken them. It just, to me, it wouldn't have weighed the same. So I love that story. So thank God someone said, "Hey, you know what? We'll give you the first one as a freebie."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah, and guys, this is different. This is different times, guys. Correction's a little bit different now, but I think that's great, because again, you're weighing the value of the sacrifice in those days. But then when someone gave you those chevrons and you became that supervisor, I think when you go to the next step, the sacrifices make sense. They're worth it. They have value. You know what the sacrifices mean, because I think, to me, I think sacrifices have to have value. If I don't have value for what I'm going to do, then I'm not going to make the sacrifice. But when you become a supervisor and you start to feel that you can make an impact and you want to take the next level up, the sacrifice is a no-brainer, because I know what I'm going to bring to the table has value, and I'm able to translate that value to my family. I mean, that's the key, because that's a big part of the sacrifice. But you also said that you became a supervisor in a time where they were pushing the basics.
So
what does that mean?
I was promoted to sergeant. I moved into the armory. I saw why the guy was let go, and I had a lot of work to do in the first couple of months, just to, get a hold of everything, all the equipment in the facility, the serial numbers, and get it documented, and get some type of system in place where I could inventory those things periodically, and come up with systems, and so that staff, inventory it on a daily basis, every shift, depending on where they were working. So I had a lot of things to do. But what happened very early on is when Larry Dubois took over, he brought a lot of the stuff that he did in the bureau. One of the things they had in the bureau was this audit team where they would audit their facilities once a year. They were pretty much operational type audits. They would come and look at from head to toe, mostly security, prison operations type of stuff. But as a team, and I'll get to this, as a team, we expanded that. But so all of a sudden now I was subject to and really was learning, again, part of the big picture and growing, that the agency, this is when I really started to understand that there was more to my job than just Southeast Correctional Center. God damn, I worked for an agency, So the outside agents, the agency folks would come in and they would evaluate our performance. And the nice thing about the job I had is they would evaluate my performance. It was kind of an individual evaluation, but the wardens and stuff, they didn't like it at the time. They thought that it was going to be held against them if they had bad audits, and of course some of it was, and some of it should have been. But so the basics, he came in with this charging hard on tool control, key control, inmate accountability. We had a new count process, and we went from there. And he brought some folks with him. And, Gangi, I went through a couple of escapes, suicides at this facility. It was a very old physical plant. And there were some things that happened that later on, we'll talk about that. I never forgot it. And when I was finally reached a position where we could address it, because no one else did, I didn't believe anyone else did. We were able to write policy related to security inspection and searches and different things. But the basics, he brought in some folks. He brought in a gentleman who worked for the Bureau, and he kind of took a liking to me. And they had this training about key control and how we're supposed to do it, and armory operations, and some of the finer details. They took the Bureau of Prisons computer program that governed, helped them manage keys and armory, which we didn't have anything like that. But we took the Bureau of Prisons and we implemented it. And they had a little competition. They had a week long, like a seminar, and the 6 guys that scored the highest there were 21 locksmiths, and the top 6 were going to go out to Aurora, Colorado, and go for 2 weeks and, really dive into the process. And I was one of those. And that was another area where I was able to grow and really understand the big picture. Now, what happened is when we came back, we were supposed to go around and help other folks, get online. It was a long process. I mean, we were well behind in those finer aspects of key control, tool control, inmate accountability. We were way behind as an agency as compared to the Bureau. But we had ended up coming a long way. So what happened was, and we could talk a little bit about my next step. I took the lieutenant's exam. I was a sergeant for 2 years, and the lieutenant's exam came up. And again, I took it my first opportunity, and I was number 1 on the list for that as well. And again, I was going to have to weigh, the commitment, in the sacrifices. But ended up in Massachusetts, you could accept that promotion, and then it was a day appointment, and then the next day I was management. What happened was that one of the gentlemen that Larry brought in from the Bureau had to leave. And that audit unit, it was a big void to fill. And they asked me to do it. Now, that was a huge sacrifice because I went from 7 to 3, Saturdays, Sundays off, and close to home, and playing ball, and, having a really good schedule, and worked at the facility and was doing well. In fact, they had recognized us, and it ended up, we did such a good job that my partner and I had an assistant at the time that we were nominated and actually got Employee of the Year for the entire agency. And it was about the basics, and we did a good job. But so I accepted that job, and for the first week, it was snowing. I was driving 2 hours in my personal car, and I was getting home at 7 or 8 at night. And I said, what am I doing here? What did I make a mistake? But I hung in there. And that was the most important role or job that I had in the agency. Wasn't the best job, but that job really expanded and have all of us in that unit. We understood the big picture in every element or every discipline.
So that was your introduction into correctional management, right?
It really was. Yeah, it was called the Policy Development and Compliance Unit, and I was a manager 2, M2, and my first title was auditor.
Now, when you real quick to kind of go past the initial step of when you cross into supervisory position before we get into this next level, for me, and maybe you could relate to it, my biggest thing was taking responsibility now of the actions of others. Like, yeah. I was always willing to take responsibility for my team, stuff like that. What it means is I have your back, you have mine. But having said that, now you're taking responsibility for actions of the people you lead. And to me, that's the thing that you really have to consider. It's not even about the external incentive. Am I willing to take responsibility, good and bad, for the people that I lead? And that is one of the main components that you take with you straight up to the highest level. That's something that you cannot leave behind. No matter what position you're in, that responsibility you have to the people that are always directly underneath you and to the people that are in their charge is of the highest priority on the way up. Is that something that you realized during that first step into a supervisory career?
Absolutely. I learned this early on. is that when something went wrong in your area, whether you were there or not, you have some sense of responsibility, because when something went wrong, they were going to come looking for you. Because just because you weren't there, or it was your day off, or you were on vacation, or you were off site somewhere, it's a pretty good chance that you were allowing some poor practice to occur on a regular. And if the investigation was worthy, or the audit was worthy, it's not something that just happened that one time. And we had some responsibility in that meaning the first line supervisors, because we allowed it to occur. We didn't require our staff to follow policy and procedure or the right things. We allowed them to shortcut.
Do you think the first line supervisory position, you're still kind of intentional in trying to understand the other departments and how they work, but as you now cross into that management position, again, you kind of, you made lieutenant, you kind of went through that pretty quickly. It's no longer intentional. Now it's all about how everything comes together. So that, to me, that's a big shift. For me, when I was a sergeant, I jumped into being a superintendent, where now I'm on the administrative side. I was responsible for areas that I had no experience in. And then, it made me very reliant on the people that I supervised, where when I was a frontline supervisor, I was pretty confident because I was supervising people that had experience. Supervising people that I had experience in the job that they had to fulfill and the expectations of the job they had to fulfill. Then when I move up to the administrative level, I have an idea of what they're supposed to get done. But if you told me how they had to do it step by step, it's like, ooh, I wouldn't know, because I've never had the experience of being in their shoes. But having said that, I am trusted to oversee them. So how tough of a transition is that from where you go from supervising an area where you're pretty confident what the expectation is and how to carry that expectation out, to now go into this management side where you become responsible for areas of control that you don't have experience in, but yet you're told to supervise?
That's why I thought that this job in the policy development and compliance unit was the most critical to the success of my career, because I was forced to learn the big pictures, and I was forced to learn the basics, not only what, but how the basics was supposed to be accomplished in all of the disciplines, whether it was human resources, food service, medical, transportation, whether it was, prison operations. But I will tell you, Anthony, that in all my dealings in the broad exposure I had to, the big picture, I had limited, I guess I should say limited exposure to the nuts and bolts of classification and programs. So when I made deputy superintendent, so if I could just go back real quickly, I did almost 7 years in the policy development compliance unit. I was there for 2 years, and they needed a deputy director of the unit. They directly appointed me the deputy director. So now the auditors work for me. And then a year later, my boss was promoted to deputy superintendent. So they made me the director, and I did that for 2 years. So I did about 7 years in that unit. I started at the entry level as an auditor, deputy director, and then the director. That job was very good also because I was the jail that we had to inspect county jails in Massachusetts by statute twice a year. So my folks went in, and I did as an auditor all the county jails and applied a set of standards that were associated with Massachusetts general law. They're a lot like ACA standard or American Jail Association standards. That was an area that I learned a lot, good or bad. Like I said, I learned a lot from people who made mistakes and so on and so forth. And one of the things with that job, Gangi, that I wanted to bring up, I hired a colleague of mine in that unit. His name was Sean Medeiros, and he was the operations officer at Southeastern, and he ended up one of those investigative positions as well. But he got the big picture as well early on. He understood that there was a big picture and tried to learn about it. And So when he came aboard, me, him, and the director, Gary Roden, and we had an attorney in the unit, Ted O'Donnell, who served the role as well. We had a couple of ACA specialists because the reaccreditation year for a facility, we would go in and do an ACA style audit in preparation of their national accreditation. The entire agency is accredited by ACA. I think they call it an Eagle Award or something when the entire agency has it. But that was very powerful for us to learn standards that govern the entire operation. Sean and I, when we were in that unit, we would hear on the news. The internet started to get extremely popular back then, and that was from '92 to '99. We would study all the prison escapes nationwide that we could get our hands on. In many cases, there would be follow-up reports. We had several escapes in Massachusetts that once the investigations were done, we would get those reports and study them. We would develop and make up checklists where there were shortcomings. And, I can tell you this, if we had a problem at one facility where something wasn't being done, you could almost guarantee you'd go into another facility and see similar circumstances. That job was, that's my first introduction to politics. Like I said, Larry, that was close and dear to Larry Dubois. But some of the wardens, they didn't like Butch Ferreira and Sean Medeiros coming in telling them what's wrong with their operation. But we enjoyed it, and we studied. We brought stuff home, and we studied escapes and different riots and different shortcomings. And we identified problems in our agency before the inmate population did, and we were able to get them fixed before they were exposed by the inmate population.
Yeah, I like what you're saying too, because even when it comes to dealing with the mistakes, I mean, I'd rather have you guys discover it than the inmates do. You're still on the same team, and making mistakes, that's a great way for us to learn and grow. So I don't think it's about judgment, because I know a lot of other places where we do internal audits before we do external audits.
Right.
And, we do a walk around to make sure we're all on page before all on the same page before we get outsiders looking in on it. So you don't want an outsider to discover it first. You would want your people. So I'm a big fan of, because I also look at it as a partnership, because one day you may audit their facilities. The ones that are ordering yours, you can audit theirs. And, it's more of how are we going to help each other out? And at the end, this isn't about an I told you so or a snitch moment. It's about, hey, we better fix this, because if we don't, these are the consequences behind it.
And I thought early on, and this was, part of our motto, was if someone's going to focus on pencil and paper issues, not crossing T's and dotting I's, and his problem with, some minor problems, you're really not worth your weight as an auditor. Yeah. You're not an expert. But, Gange, we did, I remember we broke down, and this is, I think we brought the department, the agency, in such a positive way, a long way. We were able, and our bosses allowed us to do this, right? They didn't micromanage us, and we kind of did it on our own, but they let us grow and learn on our own, which means I had some very good leaders. Looking back, we broke down the perimeter detection systems, whether they were microwave, how do they work, how are they tested? We did ball tests, we did crawl tests, we required that periodically all those things be done. We talked about tamper switches, we talked about how the sphere was, and if it could be beat, and if it couldn't be beat. We actually had an escape where they shut off a zone and the inmate escaped. It was a very, very high profile escape out of Massachusetts. But we broke down the taunt wire system. We came up with a system where we used a fish scale, and 7 pounds of pressure on the wire set off an alarm. And periodically, every shift, a number of the wires had to be tested to make sure that they actually, if they were pulled at 7 pounds, did it actually get an alarm? We did not the motion detector, but the ground sensor system as well. How they test those, and so on and so forth. We studied security inspections. We lived through an escape at Southeast Correctional Center where the inmates went out through the top floor and they cut a hole in the ceiling, got on the roof, and off they went. So after the investigation came out and the report was public. We took it and dissected it. We came up with a security inspection plan for the agency that was detailed and talked about what areas had to be probed, what areas had to be tapped and bars, and who was supposed to do it, how often, and how it got documented that it was done. Because clearly, they cut a hole in the ceiling and they used some type of like shaving cream to cover it up. If they were probing appropriately, they may have caught that. But at the time, nobody knew about probing and tapping bars. Although we found some very, very old policies that talked about some of the stuff that we were reintroducing. That was interesting. Counting keys. Every key in the facility was counted every night. We did key counts and that type of stuff. So we studied and studied and studied, and we looked and we applied. I didn't really know what it was called until I started hanging out with you, but we really understood the context why we were doing stuff. And it really all came together.
I like how, like, when you brought in under that basic, you started to develop revolve policies based on the simplistic basics of what's needed to run a facility. So still holding on to the core foundation of safety and security. And then that's where we start from, as opposed to some people who don't do it that way. I mean, they're starting everything from a rehabilitation model, and safety and security is an add-on. It's like, no, guys, this is still a prison. We have to operate with that first. So you started these policies and procedures, or the development of helping them improve by going back to the basics and then bringing them to wherever it is that they need to go. That's a great way to evolve any facility, because I always say evolve is not change. And it should never be seen as change, because evolve is really taking the core values and trying some way to bring it up from what's there, an investment of yes, successes and failures, but moving it up from someplace that we all familiar with, where change is, I'm going to shift the system. I think that even when they try to introduce like the rehabilitation model, we're going to change the system. No, you're just evolving. Because a lot of us became resistant, because when you say change, it's like, well, we've been doing this wrong the whole way. No, you're taking our successes or our failures, whatever it is, and you're learning what's working, what's not working, and you're using that. But to say change, it's like you don't give us credit for what brought us to this point. I think if we told people that we're evolving because of where we've been in the past, I think a lot of people would be more than willing to step up and be a part of that. But when you're coming out and saying, no, we're changing and we're doing it this way now, it's like, well, screw you. You just said everything I've done, from yesterday to the day before has all been wrong. But I also think what you've done in the policy procedure development, especially at that level where you can, see how policies are made, but then to be at that immediate level where you also could see how it's applied is definitely something beautiful when you're at that highest level and they just are a little bit removed from the application of policy, where they're more just developing policy. And is that now what would be your next level? Because there's a lot of titles here I'm not familiar with, but at what point are you overseeing the house, the prison, the jail?
So once I was the director of the policy development compliance unit, I did that for 2 years, and then Larry Dubois moved on, and his deputy, Mike Maloney, was promoted to the Commissioner of Corrections in Massachusetts. And in Massachusetts, you would get a call one day, hey, the commissioner wants to see you. Can we make an appointment, blah, blah, blah. He kind of knew what was coming. He was going to move you. That we signed up for that as well. That was another sacrifice that we had to make, that you really didn't have a choice. When they called, you went, or, you passed up on an opportunity that, you may never get again. But I knew that it wasn't going to be long that I would be moved to a facility that needed a tactician type performer to fix some issues. Now, as I told you, the Bridgewater State Hospital was a very I'm going to use the word famous, but well-known facility, and it wasn't because it was well run. They had a number of high-profile suicides, murders. I had hostage taken. I had a murder at the facility. And they took a lot of heat because it was a mental health facility. In my personal opinion, in the scope of a bigger picture and what I know now, and maybe even didn't know then, is probably for 49 other states I mentioned this do it differently, and there's a reason for that. And I don't believe it's because we're on the cutting edge, but I thought the facility needed to be run by mental health, and I strongly believe that's privatized now, but it's still in the Department of Correction. But anyway, Mike Maloney called me and he said, Butch, we've had a lot of things happen at the Bridgewater State Hospital over the years. I'm catching a lot of heat politically. And, they got accredited from American Correctional Association with the jail standards. But I want you to go down there and get them accredited from Joint Commission. And I was like, Joint what? I had absolutely no idea what the Joint Commission was. But again, my military background and working for my dad, if that's what you want me to do, that's what I'm going to do. So that's when I worked for a warden there, and I was the deputy superintendent of operations. So I had pretty much, in a long story short, he ran, he oversaw the whole facility, but I oversaw the day-to-day operations. I had a director of security, and I had 7 shift commanders that ran. I probably had 400 officers at one time, and it was a mental health facility. Every inmate there was committed through the court.
Yeah, and you know what's great? I want people to know this. As you start to move up, especially more towards the appointed positions, maybe the admin side of things, I believe there are certain areas where I'm going to move this person up because they excel in these certain areas. But I want people to know, all because we excel in certain areas doesn't mean we're good in every area. It means that we may be just really good and we may fit what this facility needs. But when we say fit, that's because we're also part of a team which is going to complement our weaknesses. A lot of leaders, but also even the front line may say, well, he may be great at this, but he can't do this. Well, that's where we all assist. I realize this, as you move up, the further you go up, you may only be great at 3 things. Let's just say, hypothetically, let's just say you're great at 3 things. And you have to be self-aware to know what those 3 things are. I think for me, my area of giftedness, it's different for everybody. I think I got a very good mindset when it comes to liability. It's hard to explain it to people that don't see it because you're kind of playing chess when everybody's playing checkers. But I believe that's one of my gifts. But I'm also, and sometimes gifts can be a flaw too, because I'm also a go-getter. I want to solve problems. I don't like people leaving answers in limbo, and that could be great. But some problems do require longer-term, thought-out solutions, and that's where it could become a weakness, and that's where you have the people that benefit you. But as Butch said, as he started moving up, his areas of giftedness started to show. And then it's like, okay, now we could use him here. So Butch goes into this new position. I would assume, Butch, you go in with the confidence of this is what you're there for. So you have those areas of strength, but that doesn't mean that you're closed-minded to everyone else who may have either input in that, but also how do we keep things balanced? How do we make sure that Butch is well-rounded? That's the key. And most of that really is up on the person that takes the position. Are you good enough to know that, or smart enough to know that this is your area of giftedness, but everybody else at this table here is going to support all those other areas where you may not be the best at. Me and you have something in common. We didn't have experience in classification, still one of my most weak areas, even as today. And I'm constantly going to them all the time, but it's not my area of giftedness. I rely on my people and they help me get through. They lift me up and they make me truly successful, but they also notice they don't judge me because I'm not good at classification, because they could also, it's like, oh, Gangi, you may not be good at classification, but I could see why they put you into this position. Because no one going in this higher level administrative position is going to be good at everything. Corrections has so much shit that you just can't be going saying I'm an expert in everything. You can't. But having said that, you went in with a specific area of expertise, an area of giftedness, and then you allow everyone else around you to complement what your areas of weakness are. Correct? I mean, is that kind of what opens the door into that higher level management, knowing that these are my area of strengths, but more importantly, knowing what your areas of weakness are, because you are going to be dependent on the department heads. I mean, this is a full running of a house.
So think about the decision that Commissioner Maloney made. um, being the director of the Policy Development Compliance Unit, I worked for him directly. When he was a deputy commissioner, I worked for the deputy commissioner directly. So when he made commissioner, he was a good man. He was a good manager. He was a good leader. He had a mission and picked, one of the most experienced guys or officers or managers to. I want you to now leave that job and go do this job. He knew I would do it. Now, I also think he knew that it wouldn't be easy and there would be some hard road to go. That was a very political place where it was dually operated. So we had the healthcare at the time. The mental health and the healthcare was privatized, and they had their own program director. But that person did report to the warden, and the warden, was in accordance with Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 126. It was in the Department of Correction, and it was our facility. And that's where I learned, Gange, a lot about the relationship between all the different divisions. Now, I'm going to tell you that at that time in my career, 1999, 2000, what was I, 40? I was close to 40 years old, 38, 40, maybe 42. I always thought that the corrections, the security, the correction officer was probably more to blame or had more responsibility in the bad relationship between the professionals and I use that word professionals, meaning the educated professionals and the line staff correction officer. I thought that the correction officers may have, I don't know. I thought that, they could probably work harder to mend the relationship and make sure that it was, a team atmosphere.
James, I want to comment on that real quick because
But
I agree with you. The reason why I agree with you, I wanted to mention something is that when programs started coming in, they had to adapt. How do I use my programming skill to adapt in a world like this? But as things started shifting, it was custody that had to adapt. And they, because now we're implementing programs and they're like, well, where the hell do we fit in now? Because everything's so one-sided. It was never really introduced in a balanced fashion. And every interaction has to go through custody at some level. So custody, even if they're trying their best, because they interact with most of the departments, a lot of people think that they could be the center of conflict because they're involved in anything that happens in a prison is going to go through custody.
So it was an awakening to me that I've changed my belief or my views on that since I was assigned at the Bridgewater State Hospital. I thought, and I'm going to use some words here, and I hope nobody takes it personal because I won't mention any names, but the elitist educational people thought we were stupid and thugs. And I thought that they were more to blame for the lack of togetherness and teamwork. And from that, you know how many times I had conversation with the medical director at that facility or the director of nursing, and I had to say, don't get it twisted. You work for me. I don't work for you. It was at a time where they changed the inmates, how we directed. We talked about inmates and wanted it to be patients, and I was against that, and they started to get away from some of the correctional stuff. And don't get me wrong, I don't believe, and we're getting a little bit off it, but I just want to get this point out. I believe that there's a lack of mental health beds in this country, lack of inpatient beds. And as a result of the mid to late 70s, where they closed down all the state hospitals, that our prisons have become our asylums. And I honestly believe that many of the inmates that were at that facility maybe wouldn't have been in prison if we had more inpatient beds available and treatment for them. But to keep moving, I made a lot of mistakes. That was the worst assignment that I ever had. I battled with the union. I battled with the medical staff, mental health staff. I adored the superintendent. I battled with him. I had some terrible shift commanders, had some good ones, but I had some terrible rogue officers. You know, the inmates were out of control. There was no discipline. You couldn't write a ticket on the mental health inmates. They did observation or behavioral reports. At the time when I got there, anyone could lock an inmate up for an hour. Before the hour expired, they were supposed to be evaluated by a mental health professional to continue the seclusion. It was just, it was terrible. But I learned a lot about mental health and seclusion and restraint. I learned a lot about Joint Commission. You know, I was there for a year, and Mike Maloney called, who was the commissioner at the time, and said, "What's the holdup? When are you scheduling your Joint Commission evaluation?" So he said, "Let me get back to you, Mike." He came into my office and said, "What do you think?" I go, "Just do it for next month. We're ready." And he didn't want to. He put it off like 6 months. He goes, "You sound like Mr. Maloney." He wanted to know what you thought. I said, "Did you tell him?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "So we're doing it next month?" He said, "Yeah." But we made it, you know, and there were people, the Department of Mental Health and the Commissioner of Mental Health. You know, I think she made a statement in the Boston Globe that the Bridgewater State Hospital would never be accredited by the Joint Commission. Well, guess that. Stuff that in your pipe. You know, we did it. You know, in political pressure in that facility subsided for a while, but you know, then they started questioning the, you know, the Joint Commission and whether it was a legitimate organization and blah blah blah. But but that I made a lot of mistakes in that facility. I could tell you, I was running around. I'm not embarrassed to say this because hopefully some people can learn from this. I was running around talking to supervising correction officers. It just wasn't my job, you know. I felt like if I didn't do it myself, it wouldn't get done. But we made some great changes there. The superintendent gave me the authority. I reconstructed the vehicle and pedestrian vestibules. We made them larger. We had people identified while they were secure in the vestibule as opposed to outside the vestibule when the people were leaving. We had them searched in the vestibule as opposed to inside the prison where we were finding contraband. And guess what? They were already in the prison. We did a lot of things with searches, security inspection. We got back to the basics: key control, tool control, perimeter detection was a mess when we got there, installed improperly. We got it all. So we did a lot of things, and we actually improved, you know, the communication. A lot of the stuff that the mental health and medical people wanted to do would preclude us from doing some basic correctional stuff that, you know, I just wouldn't stand for. And the boss, sometimes he took my side, sometimes he didn't. You know, he was responsible for the entire facility. So,
well, I like what you're saying, because as you go back to the basics, to me, the basics is always going to be safety and security. I mean, there's no if and buts around that. I mean, this is a correctional environment. You have to start with there at that, like I mentioned, to move up. So I think that when you're able to facilitate at your levels, I do it at my level too, communication between, like you mentioned, the professionals or the non-uniform staff, where they're able to communicate and translate their needs to custody. And then you have this partnership that's working because they both understand, you know, what has to be done in relationship to that basic, you know. So how does mental health fit in with a safe and secured operations, but also how does a safe and secured operations help facilitate mental health's needs? You know, I mean, because you have to have that partnership, because again, these are the things that have to be accomplished. So I like the fact that, you know, especially at that level, but even for me at my level, running a house, my number one priority is always going to be getting the departments working together as one. And even if there are conflicts, bringing them to the table. And I'm going to sit back and let them communicate, because at the end of the day, I don't want to delegate tasks. I want to delegate authority, because, you know, I know administration has to exist, because if not, every department's going to do what's best for themselves. But having said that, believe it or not, administration, really a good day of operation, we could sit back and let the facility run on its own momentum. I'll be like, oh, I got to find something to do. No, this is a good day. You know, yeah, because trust it, it's going to find you. It will always find you. But when people are like, well, administration up there looks like they don't do nothing, well, that means it's a good day, because their job really should only be involved when there's higher level concerns that those department heads can't meet. But for the most part, guys, if you walk around at that position and empower, you're going to have more days where you can let the facility run, because the problem solving is going to be done where it's most effective with the people that are affected by it. Like I think me solving a problem at my level is superficial compared to someone at that front line who really knows what's happening, solving that matter. Now, as you start to move higher in the house, because now you're representing the house as a whole, because I mean that to me is the biggest key. I think for me, the best position is always going to be working in a house, and I would love eventually to take my own house because you're close enough to the people, but you have the whole house. You get to see all of the operations of the facility. But when you're up there running the house, you know, how important is it for you to make sure that we're not isolated from each other, that we're working community? And if you do have an issue between, let's say, custody and medical or mental health, that you want to be fair in our exhausted efforts. Like sometimes custody may say they can't do it, but maybe we need to question them a little more. Sometimes mental health is asking for the impossible, and we have to tell them, hey, it can't be done. I mean, how much is the administrator's position to make sure that we have a trust within each other's effort? Because effort isn't always seen. You know, it's the outcome that's seen.
We've talked about a couple of things, and you made me think of this incident where I had a director of nursing at the Bridgewater State Hospital where she started to overstep her boundaries. You know, again, she started to look at the inmate as a patient as opposed to an inmate. And when the inmate was in seclusion, and this inmate had murdered another one of his fellow inmates. Yeah, he did. He murdered. He strangled him in his cell, and he was very mentally ill, very, very mentally ill, severely mentally ill. And in seclusion, they had limited, nothing really that they could hurt themselves with or hurt anybody else with. And he was in seclusion for so long. But to make a long story short, she wanted to give him a television. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. That's not you're out of your lane. You're out of your lane. Well, no, I said, you're not even mental health. You're the director of nursing. To make a long story short, I lost, and the boss let him have a television, and you know, I had to get maintenance in there to run some electrical power and all those things. And you know, long story short, I think the inmate actually, when I was gone, ended up dying at the facility. But he you know, there was so many things where mental health or medical wanted to do where I said, you can't do it not because I didn't like the process. I mean, I wish we could do it, but that would prevent us from doing some other basic things. I'll take an example. When I first got there, they would bring in everything from baked pies to cakes they were having feasts on the unit. Listen, this is a prison, and that stuff wasn't being searched properly. And we had a lot of contraband in that facility. Inmates had cell phones and weapons, and you know, they were bringing in stuff so the inmates could eat. I know they were. You know it, and I know it. You know, so there were a lot of things that, you know, I was responsible for. So I had to have some input into it. And the boss did the warden at the time did a really good job listening to us, both sides. And, you know, some arguments I won, some arguments I lost. But, and one of the things I couldn't do, because I really at the end started to despise a couple of them. But the troops saw through that, and then they didn't like them, you know. So I wasn't really leading by example or modeling the way. And, you know, I struggled with the union there. They had their own disciplinary process. You know, they were free with their hands sometimes, and I went through a rough patch with the union there. But you know, I made a lot of mistakes, but I learned. I never met with staff in my office anymore. I met at a neutral site so that I could get up and leave. I never met alone. That kind of changed once I went to different facilities and there was a different climate. But I made a lot of mistakes. That's where I learned that I didn't tolerate breaking the chain of command. Both
sometimes,
ways.
You know, you said a little nugget, by the way. When I set up meetings, and if it's a meeting I kind of want to be in and out of, I don't set it up in my office. I set it up in there, so I have the ability to leave when I got to leave.
Yep.
Get myself closer to the door, and because it's harder to kick someone out, but I could leave when I got to leave. And I want to mention something too, because we talked about the labels before we move up one more notch. But so I've written in my book, and I have articles on it. I'm a big advocate of having that label. I believe inmates can pull you out of your prescribed role if you connect them to the wrong label. And yes, they are inmates first before anything else. I've lost that battle. Obviously, you see the battle being lost across the country. So what I did was I said, well, you know what? Then there's an adapting and adjusting here. When medical calls them a patient, or a program provider calls them a client or whatever, resident, whatever it is, there's still a professional role connected to that title. Like a medical still has that connection to a patient, still a professional title, as long as they know that it's an inmate first. But I will say this, our title as custody is inmate for those inmates. That's how, we are the final fail-safe. To try to get custody to shift, to call them residents or to call them patients, I will still, to my dying day, because it's directly related to my book, that's not a professional title that connects to us as custody. It takes me away from my prescribed role, because for me, it's a softer label that, yes, may work with the medical profession or may work with the program side, but that doesn't work for me when I have to enforce the rules, because at the end of the day, I am the fail-safe. So once I saw it, starting to trickle towards the custody side, because I've always taught people first, hey, I get it, they're medical, they're patient, but they're an inmate first. Because again, it still connects to their professional role, but they're an inmate first because you're in a different environment. But for custody, you got to see them how medical sees them, or you got to see them mental. No, we could still respect and do our job, but we have to be mindful. We are the fail-safe. If I submit to a software label, who's after me? That's it. If I fail, because as I said, in my professional title, inmate and officer makes sense to me, because an inmate defines my purpose, believe it or not. If an inmate's there, that defines why I have to be there as an officer. You can't soften that label, because at the end of the day, that opens up the door for the inmate to pull you out of that prescribed role. I think medical can, has that professional boundary. I can call him a patient, but that's still my professional boundary. I think a service provider could still call him a client and get that professional boundary. I don't think custody can do that. Right. I think custody has to keep that label of inmate or whatever it is, because that is so connected to their function and role and to enforce the rules.
Anthony, on there's two facilities, the Bridgewater State Hospital, which we won't talk about anymore because it's privatized, and although it's still the only person there, I think, is a superintendent. Everybody else works for the contract. So let's move them to the side in Massachusetts. But I'm going to tell you that the Massachusetts Treatment Center, a place that's there for the sexually dangerous, they went to residents many years ago. And I'm here to tell you that some of the worst incidents that occur in Massachusetts Department of Correction, whether it be hostage taken, staff getting raped, escapes, which resulted in murders, pushing inmates out the window, and he fell and killed him, and, died. He was murdered. They've had some of the most serious incidents, and they call them residents. And
do they force custody?
Complacent. Yeah, they become complacent.
I totally agree, sir. They force custody to adopt that label. Yeah. And I said, guys, it's not in custody's prescribed role. I have fought for this at some high-level conferences, but also on national TV. I have said, guys, you want to push that towards this side, I get it. But custody, that doesn't define their role. Custody is there to enforce the rules. They're the final fail-safe. If you start shifting their perspective to softer labels, then you can't get mad when shit starts to go sideways and the officer forgets that that's an inmate, because you're making the wrong priority first for the officer. 100%. Because again, if something happens with the softer label, with the professionals, custody's got your back. We're here. That's my job. We're here. For a moment, you forgot that was an inmate. Not a problem. I'm right behind you. Hey, do me a favor. You're a little too close. He's been here too long. Let's get him out. But now what about if it's me? Who's got my back? The professional? No. We are the fail-safe. Now, politics starts, and for me, could be wrong, but I was always aware of the outcome of a political decision, no matter what level I was in corrections. But the process behind it or the reasons why weren't really so much introduced to me until I got into the higher positions, because again, most of it was intentional. I had to change. I have to know why, because I have to explain it to my people. Some I understand, some I don't. Sad to say, more I don't than I do. But I'm still going to do what's expected of me. And believe it or not, even if it's a change I don't agree with it, I have to believe in it, because I have to let my people. I have to enforce it. So even though I may not be agreement with it, I have to make sure that my people know that we have to still get it done. There's no excuses if we don't. And I will do my best to, relate the why or some higher level purpose, so I myself am happy with the work that I'm doing, because I don't want to be miserable over things I cannot control. So I will find a way to connect what I do to whatever it is that they're trying to push, and then translate that to the people that have to carry it out on a day-to-day basis. I don't want to sit there and say, hey, by the way, what you're doing now is some shit that they're trying to push, because how does that put value into what they have to do? Yeah, it doesn't. And the things that we cannot control. And people like, are you selling out? No, this is for my staff, because at the end of the day, even if I have to push something I don't agree with, but they have to do it, I want them to have value. And I can't promote value if I don't find a way to believe it in myself. And that's intentional effort. That's every day. And I know every good leader will do that, because at the end of the day, if I can't control the outcome, I'll control my own attitude and effort towards it. Now, as we move to the political side, and I start to see, as you start running the House, or even at the higher level, so for me, running the House, I start to see the why behind it, right? Now, once you get past the House, so you're at the higher level executive spot, you start to see the developing of these policies that are being pressured by politics. So you're starting to advocate for your why, but unfortunately we tend to lose most of those battles, but you're in the process of trying to fight for what we need. But unfortunately, political pressure, sometimes they just don't listen. I wish more frontline would see the efforts we do to speak up. But at one point, we could only do so much, and it's sad that we get judged by the outcome, when I wish you could see the effort. If you could trust us,
they actually have more
say.
I don't influence.
Yeah, there you go. They do. What, like if a union
they
comes
don't
up
know
and says,
that. They don't know that. The way the process is set up is they do.
Yeah, because the union may come up and say,
"Oh yeah,
hey Gangi, when was the last time you talked to the commissioner?" Well, you just talked to her yesterday, or him yesterday. So I mean, you're right. The influence matters. But so now you get to this executive staff. You're running. You're overseeing multiple prisons. Obviously, politics is big in play, because you're at the table with these legislators, developing policy, trying to get those carried out. What for someone that, now for me, I don't know, but I know there's a curiosity here. What are the biggest transitions from now leaving the House to sitting at this higher level, running multiple facilities, implementing level 1 or high level policies in the hopes that it could be applied to me? What are some of the big transitions that have to occur? I mean, because now you're really, if you're the furthest from front line, this is where it is. So how do you do your best to stay connected, but also try to get, because here's my concern, guys, is that the further you move up, you break away from the front line. Not that you mean to, but again, you're moving up, and you wind up getting more connected to this legislative, this other side of things. But you have to still remain closest to what you represent. So how do you balance all this? This is the question I'm sure Russ would ask as well. I mean, how do you at this level remain true to what's best for your the areas that you supervise? But having said that, how do you deal with things that you're not just in agreement with? And how do you do your best to motivate staff to agree with changes that, are occurring that even you yourself may not agree with, but you have to move forward with them?
That's a great question. That's probably that's the shittiest part of the job about, getting these adverse legislation or adverse decisions, and then are the results of those issues, and now you have to go back and implement some things that on the surface may not seem that difficult because I honestly believe that we can do anything in corrections. But the whys, just to me is the hardest part to sell and understand and trying to develop, a reason. I can tell you, for example, when I moved from this Bridgewater State Hospital, I moved on to Oak Colony Correctional Center as a deputy superintendent. I was there for 5 years. That was my favorite facility. It was Harmony. It was well built. It was built as a prison. We could lock the place down. We just had total control. It was clean, and it was a very high medium. So the folks coming out of maximum security, we got them in Oak Colony. People like the medical folks and us, the security folks, we got along very well. You want to know why I thought we got along very well? The hospital administrator and the director of nursing were former
Custody
correction officers.
Yeah.
Then they went to nursing school and came back, and they were fantastic. We used to hold case conferences on inmates that would manipulate doctors that said they needed, soupy Nike super jumpers that we didn't sell in the canteen, that they had to go outside to get these Nike
medical requirements.
Yeah. So we used to sit down with the inmates, and custody and medical would look the inmate straight in the face and say, "Nice try, but you ain't getting it." So that went away. But and then I moved to a place called Bay State Correctional Center, which was like a nursing home. Had some of the older inmates and some of the most well-behaved inmates in the agency, and I had to find my purpose there. I was like, "What the hell they sent me here for?" I know why they did, but it's kind of a waste, I thought, and I may have been, feeling sorry for myself at the time, but it was an opportunity where I met another really good supervisor, and the warden there was Mike Grant, and him and I became rather close, and he let me do whatever needed to be done. He let me run the facility. He let me grow and that type of stuff. But yeah, I had to find a purpose there. I was like, so people used to ask me, where do we fit in the agency? So I thought about it long and hard, and I said, a lot of these inmates wouldn't be well behaved if they had to go at another facility. Yeah. So we have a facility here where they can be well behaved and enjoy. I don't want to say privileges, but it was just a different climate.
You're so spot on, James, because I don't like when people say it's an uneventful day. I kind of say no, everything went well because we did everything we were supposed to do that day. Yeah. A lot of people put success or a quiet facility on the back end of an uneventful, nothing happened day. No, everything happened right. Because the reason why it's an uneventful day is because everybody did their job. Because the moment you don't, it's no longer uneventful. So I agree with you. I don't think there's any such thing as not doing nothing, and inmates are passively going to be perfectly well behaved. Like you said, it's the presence of staff doing what they're supposed to do.
So to answer the question, and Russ, if he's listening, it's a very good question because it's hard for me to answer, and there are some that I never did come to terms with. I never did wrap my head around coming up with a why that I could sell to the troops. Doesn't mean we didn't do it. But I thought our agency really cared about the staff. So, for example, restrictive housing units and, the very violent inmates. And I thought they stuck to their guns. And even with the political pressure, they kept folks, in restrictive housing unit if they needed to be there. Of course, they let a lot out that would reoffend and do some serious stuff. But and then they came up with these special units where, those very violent inmates would come out of their cell instead of 1 hour a day, be 2 and 3 hours. And they would sit at tables and they'd be restrained to the table and they're playing cards or, some type of
dominoes.
Some type of interaction with a human being, which they say is going to make the guy a better citizen. But I thought it was smoke and mirrors at the end. I go, okay, so we don't put him in administrative seg, or we call it some special housing unit or restrictive housing. I mean, the guy still, we still have to protect our staff. And we put things in place. I mean, so that would happen. Yeah, you can come out for 3 hours, but you're still going to be in waist shins and leg irons. And what we had restart chairs and that type of stuff where they would be secure to the piece of furniture that they were sitting at, and I don't know, but it was very hard. Some of the and this, I think I mentioned this in previous. Some of the LGBTQ legislation, pronouns, and people. I'm not sure if people even expected me to come up with something where I could sell that, because I grew up Catholic. I have some beliefs, and for the most part, I put my Catholic beliefs aside, and I don't think I do anything against my upbringing, but people knew that they knew me, and said, you can't agree with this. I said, no, but that's the rules. We're gonna do their ID cards, ask them what pronoun they want to be called, so, but the staff saw through that, and for a question, let me ask a question. What do folks think of my alternatives being in that position?
Well, see, that's the thing. So basically, as you start to move up, I tell people that you have to translate the needs of the front line with the wants of the highest levels. And you said it a couple of times already. That you have to be intentional with connecting what has to be passed down, because you yourself, you could defend it, because we always do. We're up there defending it, but if we lose, we can't go back hoping we can get the "I told you so" moment with the highest levels. We have to do our job, and we have to carry out what we're appointed to do. We can't go back and bitch and moan to our front line how much higher level doesn't even want to listen to us. We're not allowed to do that. We're not in a position to do that. So what we have to do is have to sit long and hard. We have to establish trust with our front line, so they know that we're always going to be at the back end of an exhausted effort. So they know that if we have to implement something, they trusted enough to know that Butch tried to go another route but couldn't. And at the end of the day, this is what we have to carry out. And that's good, because the more frontline respects your exhausted effort, the more you're more motivated to keep on doing it. It's when they don't appreciate it, then you stop trying, because you're going to know walking in, that's a losing battle. You know it. You're still going to make the effort, but times are shifting. So sometimes get to the point, like, I know we're at, I know we got to change it, but just give me some time, because I got to figure out a way I can present it. Now, for the people that just pass it down, I think that's wrong. I think you have to find a way to connect to it, even if you don't agree with it, to connect to it, because you have to sell it. And guys, by the way, that doesn't mean you're lying. I'm not saying make up something.
No.
When I say you have to sell it, you have to find a why or something that you could agree with. Even if, as I said, even if it's just, listen, I may not like where we're going, but if the perspective during these times makes sense, because I know we're going through this crazy world, but mind you, it's the context here. We can't eliminate the context. Like, if I don't like a decision, that could be based on a world from yesterday. But I like what you're getting at, but we're in today's world. So when I pass down something, don't put it in the context of yesterday. Put it in the context of today, so we have an understanding. So one, you don't kill the messenger, but two, we start to shift, because I'm going to tell you something. Here's the cool thing. Once we start understanding the context, then the people that are most affected by these changes can kick back something that we can invest in that can make it better. What sucks is when you don't get the investment and you wind up having resistant staff, and you're pushing at the highest level without any care of how it's applied, because you don't have the investment from the front line. But if I can get you to buy into the times, and then at that point, this is where we're at, how do we make this work? I get you're resistant to it, but I'm not looking for obstacles. I'm looking for resources. I have to make this work, and when you said the alternative, there is none. We're appointed. The only alternative is you're out, and I'll find somebody else to do it. I know people don't, well, you're going to do that for us. If you respected me and you really want me as a leader, do you really want me to do that? I'm making my effort, but once they say you got to carry it out, I'm going to work on a way to connect it to you guys. But as we start to wrap it up, James, do you have anything you'd like to say, in close? Going through this transition, going through the multiple steps, just something that, right from day one, when you see this as a career, what are some of the steps, again, just to kind of reiterate, or that you got to take with you that you still hold on to at the highest of level? What was, like, some of the core values of first entering a supervisory position that has never left you at the highest position?
I think the most important aspect is the fact, and I said it earlier, the faster you can identify that there's a bigger picture, and the faster you can learn the bigger picture. And when I think I mentioned it takes a long time to learn it, the better off you're going to be. And if you can understand the bigger picture and the why, then you can start connecting the purpose and how to attack these things and get them done. With influence, and people doing it because they want to do it, not because they have to do it. But you've got to identify the bigger picture and understand that there is a bigger picture. Because if you do isolate yourself, I don't think that I made those mistakes. I isolate myself. I told you there were times where I bet my boss didn't even want to look at me because I was more concerned with security and operations than medical, let's say, or programs and classification. Or here he comes again, And I know some of those people didn't like me because I had a stronger personality. But
to be honest with you, Butch, that's a good point, because as you move up, it's hard to not take our past with us, but you have to find a way to be objective. Because for me, I always find myself sometimes wanting to kind of use that safety and security as an excuse sometimes.
Sure.
But having said that, you have to represent the house fairly, and sometimes we could get it done. We just may not want to. And I think that, like you said, you got to be objective and really understand, like, okay, so like, let's say the TV concern, maybe on the surface we see a medical personnel, mental personnel wanting to give this inmate a TV, but maybe the bottom line is they need something to stimulate his mind, keep him going. So
sure, that was their argument. Yeah.
Yeah. So I may say no to the TV, regardless of me caring about what's the TV for. It's like, well, hold on. Before we say no, I always ask them, why do you think it's needed? It's for this. Well, is there any other way we can still accomplish that? What about a book? What about a radio? What because now I know why you need it. So I'm never quick to say no unless you can, unless the why is irrelevant. Like, oh, he needs to have a TV because he wants to watch football.
Anthony,
no.
When the guy hurts himself with the TV while the officer's doing because that guy never came off what we call the constant observation. If he smashed the TV and got plastic or some type of weapon, that nursing supervisor going in there and getting the weapon?
No, they're not. So, that's right. You're totally 100% correct, Butch. So that's where the balance comes in, because then you have custody working with medical, like you have the officer side of things where they were a balance of both, where it's like, we can't just give them this. So having said that, if the end result is to stimulate the mind, what are the other alternatives? Because some people may jump and think that the TV is the easiest solution. Yeah, out in the real world, maybe. But in the prison world, it's not the best. Amen. Yeah, so it's not the best. So
you hit it right on the head. Amen.
Yeah, and Butch, we're so on point with each other because I think what happens here is sometimes people look for the immediate fix, the immediate solution. So they go back to what they know. That default mode is, well, shit, a TV would work. And it's like, well, hold on, why do you need it? We need it for this. Well, that's where custody can come in. Well, can we do it this way, this way, this way? Now, if they become resistant to our alternatives, now we have an issue. It's like, stop with the TV. We can't give the person the TV. But if it's to stimulate their mind, I have offered you a radio. I have offered you a book. Meet me in the middle. You went for TV. I went for book. Let's meet in the middle with a radio. In corrections, when it comes to the balance of safety and security and medical and mental health, both being two priorities, because they are, I would like to lean on safety and security, but sometimes they shift. We have to meet in the middle. The absolutes of a TV and my absolute of nothing doesn't work. We have to figure out, okay, well, you absolutely wanted a TV. I absolutely wanted nothing. Obviously, that doesn't solve anything. How do we meet in the middle? Well, will a radio suffice? Yes, because we both started as extremes. We worked in the middle. But if you have one part, it's like, no, TV, then I'm going to go right back and do what? Nothing.
Thank you. That's exactly, and to get to
I love you, man. Get
to the end of this, I can tell you of an incident where the inmate, when they're on the seclusion, they're on constant observation, and the protocols for that were they didn't even get toilet paper. They had to ask for a Kleenex, or when they needed the toilet paper, we would give them a required amount, and then we would make sure that they flushed it. And we had the inmate swallow the toilet paper, and he actually ended up choking and dying. So there was a reason for that. But think of the correction officer doing the watch. Now, when he did that, the correction officer that was on the constant observation watch, he was scrutinized, as he should have been. He was part of the investigation. What were you doing? How come you didn't see it? He felt threatened. He felt his job was threatened. Now here we're giving an inmate electric power to the cell, a television with a cord, and it was just so hard to sell. But moving on, I really think the big picture, understand quickly that there is a big picture, and then learn the big picture as fast as you can. And how you get that, people take different routes to that. And we can do this again, but there was a little bit more I wanted to cover, with my thoughts on corrections, but we'll have opportunity.
No, we'll always listen. You're on all. We're going to do more. I run the 2 hours, and we had a lot of good information. We could talk for a whole nother hour. But having said that, I think there's also ways when we do a later dialogue, we can highlight some of those specific tips. But again, James, thanks for coming on, man. I mean, this was great. It gives a journey of officer to executive staff, and it kind of shows you, a lot of the trials and reason behind decisions. Gives a little bit of an understanding towards what it takes to move up, but also the mindset. When do things start to transition? When do you start to take responsibility? What do you take with you? When does politics get involved? And I thought it was a really good dialogue, and hopefully you guys enjoyed it. And obviously we'll have Butch on again. But as always, guys, the show is Tier Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Stay safe.